Hello, everyone. The South Carolina Office of Special Education Services, along with the Transition Alliance of South Carolina, present Transition Assessment. This presentation is part of the Summer Transition Camp webinar series. The information and resources contained in this webinar are for general information purposes only and should not be construed as an endorsement by the South Carolina Department of Education. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to your presenter, Dr. Jennifer Wall.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to the summer camp session on transition assessment. The goals for our camp session today are we're going to go over transition assessment so that you understand fundamental transition assessment concepts, understand the different types of transition assessments, learn skills necessary in helping you select assessment instruments, as well as conduct the age-appropriate transition assessments, and finally, able to use the assessment data to inform transition-rich IEPs. The overall theme of our virtual transition camp is implementing evidence-based practices into our transition practices. One of the things that we are doing in all of our session is we are modeling this through the use of guided notes. Guided notes are simply pre-made notes that include blank spaces for writing down components from the lecture. Within all of my slides, you will see in this particular one where it says guided notes, it's purple, meaning that something's hyperlinked. But in the version that is available on our website, every single resource that I discuss or assessment will be linked to that version, so you're able to get that for yourself. Here's an example of what the guided notes will look like. This is the purpose of IDEA, which is the very beginning of your guided notes. If you have those for our transition assessment session today, whenever the presentation begins, this is what it will look like on each of the slides. Simply, it's underlined so that you will write down those important key components of the slide, but still able to pay attention to your presenter. We hope that you use these guided notes not only whenever you go back in your practices of transition assessment, but also when you're implementing evidence-based practices within your classroom. So the purpose of IDEA, as we all know, is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special ed and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And then IDEA 2004 is when we get those more specific things that we call the transition laws. So I'm not going to read this to you. You guys probably know IDEA 2004, but when we are developing the post-secondary goals for our students, this requires us to work together as professionals. We have to work with our students, we have to work with families, and we all need to look at transition assessment as an ongoing process. However, this does not mean that new methods and models of assessment are needed. We do not need to develop new transition assessments. What is necessary is to determine what information is currently available, what information is needed, and what method of assessment would be most effective for that particular student. Because the elements of a transition-rich IEP include post-secondary goals and present levels of academic achievement and functional performance that are based on age-appropriate transition assessment. Measurable post-secondary goals, transition activities and services that include the course of study, measurable annual IEP goals that relate to those transition service needs. The people are invited that need to be invited, and it's student-centered. Wanted to remind everyone of what the profile of our South Carolina graduate looks like whenever we are thinking about the student and how we focus on the student and how transition assessment is focused on the student. We want to make sure that we have all of these things in perspective when we're planning for our assessment. So why is it so important that we emphasize on the student? No one has students like is pictured here, but it's the law that they're invited to their transition meeting and their IEP. Inviting them to the meeting is a way to help promote their self-determination. And as we all know, that if we focus on self-determination, our students will have positive adult outcomes, better employment, better living situations, positive school experience, higher grades, and fewer behavior problems. Think about how important this is. For our students to have better outcomes, we have to focus on student-centered and self-determination. Okay, so what did you want to be when you grew up? Take a minute, jot it down on your guided notes. When you were in middle school, what did you want to be when you grew up? Many of us probably did want to be in education, but others of us, probably it was something completely different. But how about this? Did any of us want to live in poverty? Did we say that when we grew up, we wanted to earn minimum wage? Or we wanted to end up taking classes to further our education while we were in prison? Did any of us say that we wanted to have no health insurance? Or to keep social services in their lives? Or even to be homeless? So if we look at data for students with disabilities, for each 100 students that leave high school, students without a disability, 58 would get a permanent paid job right away, while 28 with a disability would get a permanent paid job right away. And then if we look at that same data a year later, 70 individuals without a disability versus 38 with a disability. And then sadly, if we look at the data throughout adulthood, 82% or 82 will continue to work without a disability, and only 30 with a disability will continue to work in a permanent paid job when the data are looked at across their adulthood. So the earnings disparity of over $10,000 in median income between student or adults with and without disabilities has existed for as long as we've been collecting this data. And then more than 1 in 5 residents with disabilities live in poverty. So the magic of transition is that we have all of these laws that have helped our students and helped teachers and educators prepare students to have better post-school outcomes. In 2004, IDEA expanded the definition of transition services, which gave us as educators so many more resources and so much more to give to our students in the areas of transition. Transition is results-oriented. Transition is student-centered, and transition is a coordinated effort. All of this is so important to get our students from their 13 to their adulthood. There's so much work that has to be done so that our students aren't in that percentage of adults that aren't working, or that percentage of adults who live in poverty or have no health insurance or are homeless. It's up to us to make sure that they have all the tools that they need to make that seamless transition into adulthood. So where does that all start? Transition assessment. The definition of transition assessment can be debated and discussed. Is the definition of transition assessment? We really don't have anything that is defined by the law that tells us what transition assessment is. The law just tells us that we have to do it. And it says that we have to begin it not later than the first IEP to be in effect when the child turns 13. So we know that appropriate measurable post-secondary goals based on age-appropriate transition related to training, education, employment, and independent living have to be done. But while age-appropriate transition assessment isn't defined by the law, there's some clues as to the intent of what that should be. And so therefore, DCDT, which is the Division of Career Development and Transition, which is a subdivision of the Council for Exceptional Children, has defined transition assessment for us as the ongoing process of collecting data on the individual's needs, preference, and interests as they relate to the demands of the current, future, working, educational, living, and personal and social environments. So assessment data really serve as the common thread in the transition process and form the basis for us defining goals for students and services that are related in that IEP. Okay, so let's look at that. Appropriate measurable post-secondary goals based upon age-appropriate transition assessment. And it's an ongoing process of collecting data. So what does this look like as a teacher? What does this look like as an educator? Well, first, the definition of age appropriate, let's just get it out there. It is the student's chronological age. That means it is your birthday, you are turning 18. That is your age, not the developmental age. We have a lot of confusion about how this plays into it. And I know that we have a lot of conversations around this, but age appropriate is the chronological age, not their developmental age. And I put this picture of No More SpongeBob because unfortunately we do see transition assessments that still have pictures of Care Bears or SpongeBob and things like that. Now, I'm not saying if you have a student that is motivated by SpongeBob that you can't use that as a reinforcer, but make sure that we're using age-appropriate transition assessments for our students to collect data to inform their IEP goals. Ongoing process. Ongoing process means that we are constantly working to inform the transition process. And that, like I said, this is a common thread that serves throughout the whole process, and it's the basis of defining goals. Ongoing process means that we evaluate what we're doing. And just because it's on one IEP or one transition component doesn't mean that, it stays on there. It's coordinating family, school personnel, and then outside agencies. We want to make sure that we are really focused on the student, really focused on results, and making sure that we work together to make sure that, the transition assessment is an ongoing process. We look at some data from South Carolina researchers that have examined court findings. And we don't want to end up in any situation where our IEPs are taken to court or taken into situations where we're looked at as why we did a certain thing. However, we can learn from previous mistakes. So this data show us that multiple assessments across transition domains are needed. Do not solely use informal assessments. We're going to say that one again. Do not solely use informal assessments. That means that at least one of the transition assessments that you use needs to have supporting validity evidence. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So you should have formal assessments and informal assessments. And we could take it a step farther if you've attended any of our research to practice in the past. Some of the folks have really stressed that we do not use one assessment, that we make sure that we are using multiple assessments across transition domains, and we are gathering as much information as possible. And this is to maximize student participation in the transition planning process. Okay, so if you are joining us for our recorded session, you can use your phone and the QR code, or you can simply click on the link below and you can fill out these questions. These questions ask things like, do you want to be in charge of others? If you got a holiday bonus, what would you buy? If I were to call your current boss, what would your current boss say about you? All of these are multiple choice questions, so you have to select one of the identifiers that are put in there. It asks where you prefer to work. If you had a pet, what pet would you prefer? Who you would like to work with, and there's a list of celebrities. And then a book series that you have to choose from. And then the last and the most important question is, if you were going to buy the most important thing for your office, what would it be? And it has a list of questions for you. So if you took the time to fill that out or listen to me and thought of your answers, I'm going to tell you that based on the transition assessment right there that we just went through, that I answered the questions, it says that I am going to be a chef, that I'm creative, patient, and meticulous. I enjoy creating beautiful things that make other people happy. I'm a person of the world, and I'm meant to turn basic things into great art. So here are, and finally, 2 questions that we could add to that is, what training or school do I need to do to be a chef? And then, do I want to go to tech school, community school, 4-year, or no college at all? And then if I answer those questions, could I be a chef? So obviously we can research what training and school that I need to be a chef. And then we could look at what schools are local in South Carolina to where I live that I could be a chef. Okay, here's my answers, guys. I answered the questions as, yes, I like to be in charge of others. If you know me, you know I would buy shoes if I got a holiday bonus. My current boss would say I'm a perfectionist today because I probably redid this PowerPoint 1,000 times, but 2 weeks ago, my answer could have been different for that. I don't like animals that much in my house, so I picked turtle, but I do love dogs. So on another day, I may have put dogs. I like to work at home right now because of the current situation that we're in. I think Gordon Ramsay's amazing. So therefore I picked that I would like to work with Gordon Ramsay. I am not a chef. There is nothing about any of the answers that are on your screen that would let you believe that I can cook or that I should turn things into art. The book series, The Hunger Games, maybe because it says hunger, that, you know, that leads the assessment to a chef. And the most important thing I want is a new chair. Okay, how does a chef even sit down? Or how does a chef work with a new chair? And so if you really think about the results of that transition assessment, are the results valid of this? How could this actually even be used for any, valid transition assessment? But this very assessment that I shared with you is one that's being shared with people as a transition assessment, as data to career interest inventory. So this would lead a student into developing, not necessarily goals, but, researching into a chef. And I can tell you that if you know me, you know that I was not meant to turn basic things into great art. If you ask my family, I'm not supposed to look at Pinterest because I will turn things into a big mess, not into a work of art. So does any of this constitute a transition assessment? Are we done? That one assessment that we went through, and then those tiny little questions about the training that I would need. Does this constitute a transition assessment? If anybody were to tell you yes, they're wrong, because the results of transition assessment, it's really specific. It is really specific on the things that we are supposed to gain from transition assessment. They're listed here for you. No matter what type of transition assessment we use, the results need to help us develop realistic and meaningful IEP goals and objectives. The results are supposed to help us make instructional and programming decisions. They're supposed to provide information that add to our present level of performance related to the student's strengths, interests, preference, and needs. We want to learn about individual students, especially their strengths outside of just academics and career ambitions. And we want to help students make a connection between their individual academic program and those post-school ambitions and inform our IEP and summary of performance. So while the transition assessment process is going to look different depending on what instrument you use and what procedures are a part of that transition assessment, and obviously student characteristics vary. Although formal instruments may be easier and quicker to administer, they should be primarily used to verify observations of student behaviors and performance. Students should always be inventoried about the results, no matter if it's a formal or informal assessment, conversation with the student. Because if you would have brought me the data that I'm supposed to be a chef, I would laugh at you because I should not be a chef. So we have to take those data to students to get their verification of the results, so to speak. So one of the approaches that is an evidence-based practice for conducting transition assessment is APIE. Assess, plan, instruct, and evaluate. This is a model for transition assessment. In the first step, assess, educators assess the student's interests, preference, and needs in relation to the student's post-school outcomes using both formal and informal assessments. The next step, plan, involves interpreting the results from these assessments and then incorporating those into the student's transition plan. The third step, instruct. Students learn the skills that they need to reach their post-school goals. Finally, evaluate. Students and educators, both of us, the students and the educators, work together to evaluate whether progress has been made towards achieving the transition activities and the IEP goals and objectives. It's important for the assessment information to continually be collected with periodic checkpoints, because students may change their mind. What they're interested in or what their preferences are can change. Remember when I asked you to write down what you thought you were going to be in middle school? Has that changed? Have you changed your mind? From 6th grade to 7th grade, did you change your mind? From 7th grade to your senior year, did you change your mind? See the ongoing process, see the periodic checkpoints, how important that is. And then students learn skills, and they actually learn their own strengths. As they move and progress through high school, through middle school, through amazing teachers, they start to realize and have those self-realization skills about things that they never knew that they were able to do. And so evaluation is such an important part of transition assessment because students change. So 9 ideas. This is methods of transition assessment. This is really important because it doesn't matter what process you follow in conducting transition assessment. You really need to think about these methods of transition assessment and how they help us with conducting transition assessment. So we want methods that incorporate assistive technology or accommodations that allow the individual to demonstrate potential. We want the student to do well on the transition assessment. We do not want them to do poorly on the transition assessment. We want to see their abilities. We want to see their potential so that we're able to write an IEP and a transition component that accurately describes what they are good at. So methods must occur in environments that resemble actual education, training, employment, independent living, or community environments. Let's think about that. If we're doing transition assessment to assess if a student is able to use a pegboard, and I use that because I know in the ONET ability profiler, that's one of the components, the pegboard and the washer. It depends on if you're left-handed or you're right-handed, if you're able to do those components correctly. However, if we're doing, specific components and we're not doing it in an environment that resembles employment, the student doesn't know why they are doing that specific assessment. They may not do their best, or they may not understand the context of why it's important that you see that particular skill set. Produce outcomes that the methods must produce outcomes that contribute to ongoing development, planning, and implementation of next steps in an individual's transition process. Methods must be varied and include a sequence of activities that sample an individual's behavior and skills over time. Data must be verified by one or more method and by one or more person. Remember how I said it was important for the student to verify the information. We're going to look at transition assessment examples that will have components not only for the student, but for the parent and a caregiver or a teacher. So we're looking at different aspects of the data and we're verifying it. And if there's a difference between one perception or another perception, then we're able to figure out why or make a plan to address it if needed. Number 6 is the data must be synthesized and interpreted to students with disabilities, their families, and transition team members. Number 7, data and results must be documented in a format that can be used to facilitate transition planning. The method should be appropriate for learning characteristics of the individual, including cultural and linguistic differences. And finally, the information should be current, valid, verified, and relevant to transition in order to better inform the summary of performance. These methods of transition were first published in 1997, but have been verified multiple times by the National Center. So these recommendations of what to do to conduct transition assessments are research-based. This is an evidence-based practice of how to conduct and methods for conducting transition assessment. So how do I select which instrument to use? Do I just Google and find that cool QR code that I posted a few seconds ago for students to use? We need to become familiar with the different types of transition assessments and their characteristics. It is recommended that we use multiple assessments on an ongoing basis. So we want to select methods that assist students by helping them answer the following questions on your screen. Who am I? What do I want in life now and in the future? What are some of life's demands that I can meet now? What are the main barriers to getting what I want from school and my community? And then what are my options in the school and my community for preparing for what I want now and for what I want in the future? We're going to select approaches that are appropriate for your students in terms of cognitive, cultural sensitivity, language, comfort. You know your students. And then we want to always interpret and explain assessment results in formats that our students and our families can understand easily. Now, if you're new to transition or if you're new to teaching, do not create a transition assessment. Transition assessments are all over the place. Our website has so many. We're getting ready to review a whole lot. Do not feel overwhelmed that you have to collect all this data and prepare the instruments, because I promise there are some great evidence-based tools out there. We're going to review a lot of those today, and I'm going to give you links to go to and support you in this transition assessment process. Now, informal assessments do include teacher-made assessments, which we are going to talk about that. But do not feel overwhelmed at this point with transition assessment or having to create one. So what are the differences? I've said informal and formal assessments a few times already since we got started in the presentation. So if we think about the differences, what are they? So a formal assessment typically involves some type of standardized instrument that administers scores and interprets an assessment. And this allows the student score to be interpreted or compared to other students and gives us that norm reference. But not all standardized assessments are norm reference, so don't be confused. Although these assessments provide useful data in helping us determine aptitude, skill, ability, but guys, we have to remember that assessment in that real environment needs to be done. It has to resemble actual community, actual school, actual education and training. And so there are lots of advantages to those formal assessments. Like I said, we got the norm process, which gives us validity and reliability, which is super important. Helps us compare students to others, their age. Oftentimes it's a starting point to help us determine some of the developmental career development activities. And it does, oftentimes these formal assessments, the bigger ones, are hands-on tests, and students really seem to enjoy those, you know, more so than these old school paper pencil assessments that are just as good, but students may not enjoy it quite as much. Now, disadvantages of formal assessments, as you're going to see, in our links in a few minutes that some of these can be quite costly to purchase the formal assessments. And if you're in a district that doesn't have a lot of funding for transition assessments, the lack of availability could be an issue because you might share with another teacher. And it may be time consuming to give and take these assessments. Some of these take 7 times meeting with the student and can take up to an hour each of those times. And then also it may be limited to use, like the person who gives the actual assessment has to be qualified to give that assessment, interpret the results for those to be valid, and the training may not be available, or that person may not be available within your area. Now, informal assessments also provide measures of student performance over time. They're useful in determining the effectiveness of instructional interventions. However, they do not allow for comparison to other students. Information accumulated and documented by observing the student as he or she participates in various academic and work experiences, talking with the students about their likes and dislikes, setting up those experiences that will allow the student to try something that he or she thinks may be of interest, provides a wealth of data, and that is informal data. Now, some of the advantages of informal data, they're inexpensive, sometimes they're free. Seldom do we have to have professional qualifications to use those. Provides good usable information, especially when used on an ongoing basis. And then it can be easily attained from the students as an interview, an observation, or questionnaire. Sometimes can be, quicker. Now, disadvantage of informal assessment, it may be time consuming to arrange or set up a tryout. If you've never set up a job tryout, start to finish the correct way, it is very, very, very time consuming. So if you don't have assistance in doing that or community support already, it would take a lot of time. And then some careers cannot be tried out. So you can't go and sit with a psychologist or a therapist during a session because that's just not allowed. Expressed interest can be narrow and only reflect a limited experience. We're going to talk more about that and how we can expand that for our students. A lack of formal norming process, reliability, validity information, because that is very important for making sure that our IEP reflects database decision making. So remember, we said it cannot solely be based on an informal assessment. Here's why. We have to have multiple assessments across multiple domains to make sure that we are making database decisions. So we're going to look at some examples. On each of the slides that I have, I've put some names of assessments on your screen so that some of them are examples. Like this particular one is not linked to anything, but whenever we start going into the examples, when you get the PowerPoint, when it's posted on our website, each of these will, when you click on it from your presentation, it'll go to the information. So first, we're going to go through a lot of formal assessments, and then we're going to go through a lot of informal assessments. I'm going to show you some examples, and we're going to talk through some of these. So achievement tests. Achievement tests typically measure learning of either general or specific academic skills. They provide results that can be linked to occupational requirements, which is important because it helps us identify potential areas of remediation or accommodation. For example, reading comprehension. If a student has, if they struggle in reading comprehension, then we're able to work on that through their instructional practices, through their annual IEP goals to help them reach post-secondary goals that would need them to have higher reading comprehension skills. Achievement tests are usually general survey batteries that cover subject areas or just a single subject test, and they are usually norm referenced or criterion reference, and sometimes even both. And achievement tests are usually identified by grade level. It's important that we establish a specific purpose for a test before we give them. And there's some examples on your screen now. So adaptive behavior and independent living, these are probably used more frequently than the achievement tests in our IEP development. Now, we do use the achievement test whenever we are helping write the present level of academic performance. I'm pausing so I can make sure my notes, there we go. Okay, so adaptive behavior and independent living. These we use more frequently, like I just said, but this helps us decide if students need a post-secondary goal in the area of independent living. We're going to talk about this a few more times in the presentation, but I want you to remember that I'm telling you to use a formal assessment to help you determine if a student needs a post-secondary goal in the area of independent living. This can include the type and amount of assistance that they may need if a student needs assistance at all in residential, self-care, transportation, social communication, or even participation in the community. Now, this assistance could be in the form of like homebound support services, special ed, vocational training. It could be special living arrangements, but a lot of times the data that come from these assessments could come from a parent or caretaker or a teacher. So like I said earlier, some of these scales are going to have a teacher, a caregiver, and a student perspective or survey, which is really important to have all of those. So an aptitude test, we know that those are used for a specific ability. So ASVAB, obviously that one is used for the armed services. And so that is a specific aptitude test. This ability involves what a person can do now, and then given the proper opportunity, what they can do in the future. There's two different types of aptitude tests. I think it's multi-aptitude, and then another name for that is a general test battery, and then single test with specific batteries. So the general aptitude test is a wide range of aptitudes. So the ONET ability profiler, there's several components to that and there's math components, written expression components, fine motor skills, flexibility. So it is a general test of multiple things that you are going to gather data on. And a student's performance on those type tests do give us very valuable information that can help us gauge their potential or success in that specific education program or that specific training area. And then single aptitude tests are used for a very specific career or a very specific skill set that you need for a career. So there's some examples on the screen. Interest inventories. So interest inventories was one of the very original assessments that we used to gather students' likes and dislikes, variety of activities, objects, types of people that you commonly encounter. Interest inventories provide the opportunity for us to compare interest to specific occupational groups, specific peer groups, and honestly, regardless of what interest inventory that you do, it just if it generalizes across time. So really important, an interest inventory output has to give you skill-based information for goal development. So let's think about that for just a second. The information that you get, I'm going to go back to that screen. The information that you get from the formal interest inventories, the data that are collected, needs to give you information that helps you with goal development. So what we're going to do right now is, if you are watching this video on playback, then you are going to pause this video for just a second, and you're going to read, there's two very short case studies on David and Sierra. And I'm trying to find mine, so this is going to have to be edited out. I'm sorry. Here we go, found it. Okay, so if you've taken a few minutes to read over the case studies based on interest inventories, I want to remind you that interest inventories can provide valuable information about a student's interest. However, remember it has to give us skill-based information for goal development. Particularly with career and vocational interest inventories, the information must be used with caution. The validity of the results is only as accurate as the student understands the world of work. Because students assessed are often teenagers, their understanding is limited to their own job experiences and the jobs they have seen from others, like teachers, lawyers, doctors, professional athletes, police officers, firefighters, waiters, store clerks. So does that ring bells for any of you for your IEPs when you're doing these? How many of your students want to be those things? Even though those jobs are visible jobs, what the public sees is not necessarily a complete look at the job. The only way to really understand the job is to spend time job shadowing or participating in a trial of that job. So as a case study, we looked at David. David struggles with reading, and he does not actually like to read, and he doesn't like to write. But you saw that his post-secondary goal was that he wanted to be a lawyer. He sees lawyers as people who argue in court because of things he's seen on TV or in movies, has power, and helps people in society. So it's our job to look at what's appealing about that job to him. And if he understood that they spend a great deal of time researching, reading, and writing, that career may not be quite as appealing. However, you can learn important information about the kinds of careers David or any student identifies as interesting from these inventories. So he might be saying that a good salary or prestige is important, or that helping people is important, or that he wants to move around, because on TV, lawyers are always moving around. So, physical work may be important to him. Just acknowledging these things and considering environments will provide valuable information that is critical in helping students discover and define interest. Even if a student is interested in a specific job that seems like a really terrible match to you, a job in that environment may fulfill some of the student's work values and needs. Think about Sierra. When you read the case study on Sierra, I am sure that you thought that because of her cognitive and physical limitations, that being a surgeon was not in the cards for Sierra. Probably wasn't realistic. But then think about other jobs within the hospital or nursing home that exist that would allow her to still work in the medical field. There's a wide range of interest inventories available out there right now. Many address the needs of non-readers, students with low reading skills, and then students who are fluent readers. We have computer-based, we have video-based, and there are several that are posted on the internet, and then students can even take them online at home, and they don't have to be with you. So interest inventories are an area that we have really grown as far as transition assessment goes. This is an example. I put updated teacher-made picture interest inventory, because right here where it says picture interest career survey as a formal assessment, the one that I'm put a picture of is not that same one. This is updated, and I'm going to tell you why it was updated. So there's some really great resources out there for picture inventories, except some of the pictures were taken in 1987 or a really long time ago. And so while the picture interest is really good, some of the things that they are using in the pictures, students may not know what they are. For example, an overhead projector. There was a picture of a teacher assistant and a teacher making an overhead transparency for an overhead projector. Students do not know what transparencies are. And so this teacher updated the vocational interest inventory to include maybe more up-to-date photos. And there is a ton of pages. I just did a screenshot on these to show you that, how it works. The students identify the things specific to what they are interested in through this assessment. ONET is also an interest inventory. ONET is a great career interest inventory. So if you've never seen ONET, here is the computer version on your screen. This is one that I would say I have used a lot, and it is 60 questions. You can see an example of 12 of the questions on your screen, and it has a face for the student to say, yuck, or a sad face, I'm not so sure, I like it, and then the last emoji seems to be, I really, really like it. And you can spend time with the students explaining the difference in those 5 Likert scale type answers. But it goes through and it says, I like to build kitchen cabinets. I like to lay brick or tile, develop a new medicine. And it goes through these 60 different skills for your interest profiler. When you get to the end, it gives you the results of which specific areas the student's interest falls within. And then the next part is called job zones. And when it takes you to the job zones, it gives you examples of jobs that fall into those interest areas. And then it asks the students another series of questions about how much school they want to do, how much training they want to do. And then based on that information and their career interest area, it gives them a list of careers. And within that list of careers, it gives them videos to watch, and they're very short videos. So then as the teacher, I not only have the ONET data of the interest profiler, but now I can do observational data by looking at, they're watching a video on this specific job. Did they like it? Does it look interesting? Do they want to continue learning about these things? So it helps me figure out why those answers led to that job. Remember, I'm not a chef, but because I said maybe Gordon Ramsay or maybe I said Hunger Games, it led me to that. So it's really important, like I said, we discuss the results with our students. So then we have our intelligence tests, which those provide a single test or test battery to assess cognitive performance. And in your district, you may have a very specific intelligence test that clarifies cognitive performance by the students and is used by your diagnostician, school psychologist, etc. But these are some examples of intelligence tests here, and these are examples of tests that you do have to be trained to administer. Personality or preference tests are usually measure our students' social traits, motivational drives, needs, attitudes, adjustment. This can offer a means of evaluating support for or opposition to careers under consideration, which is very useful. However, a score alone should not be, a personality score should not be the single predictor of success or failure, but it should just be compared to other data. In other words, we don't want to give a personality test as a formal transition assessment and use that data as the sole factor. We wouldn't do that anyway, but based on a student's personality doesn't lead us into just one career path. So formal career development measures. These are inventories that measure developmental stages or tasks on a continuum of our students. The degree of an individual's career maturity is determined by the location on that actual continuum. Some of these are really, really good assessments of that. The job search attitude inventory, I think there's 38 components on this one, and gives some really good data for the teachers. These are very specific skills that the teacher can help the student in developing with the attitude inventory. And it doesn't have to be this specific one. There's lots of other great ones, but it is important that we do look at some of those measures. So on-the-job or training evaluation, this is arguably one of the most effective ways to determine whether a student is ready to work at a given position in some form using on-site assessment. Most employers have their own evaluation tool that can be modified to meet our needs. But these are some examples on your screen that provide, I guess, we call them soft skills, but assessing, general behaviors that a student may need at any job, no matter where they are working. So they're just not as specific to jobs, but they can help you with those training evaluations. Self-determination. We know that self-determination is an important skill for all students with disabilities, actually all students with or without disabilities, but it really has to do with being able to self-regulate your own behavior. So the students, the self-determination assessments help us determine if they have the aptitude and the opportunity for specific components within self-determination. And some of those components include goal setting, problem solving, self-advocacy, self-evaluation. And those are really important, job skills, independent living skills. Really you have to have self-determination skills because, that has a big impact on their post-school success. Right? If they're going straight into college, if they're going into more training, they're going straight into work, this is a skill set that we really want to focus in with our students. And these are great assessments. So here's examples on your screen. I showed this one. The parent fills out the first part, things my child does. The student fills out the things I do. And it's pretty much asking the same question, like my child knows what he or she needs, likes, and is good at. The student answers the question, I know what I need, what I like, and what I'm good at. And then the teacher has a different set, but it's basically the student knows his own abilities and limitation, gives an example. And then we're able to look at all of the data as a teacher and see where the gaps are or where the needs are so that we can make goals and develop those goals based on skills that the students have identified, the parent has identified, and then the teacher has identified as things that we can work on. So now let's look at some examples of informal. So the ones listed on this on the screen are examples of informal transition assessment. So first we have interviews and questionnaires. Interviews and questionnaires allow us to gain information to be used to help us determine a student's need, preference, and interests relative to what their post-school outcomes could be. So basically what we're doing is collecting information that helps us understand the kid and what perceptions do they have about transition-related factors, what their family influences are on the career development process. And then we can take this information, work with the student to develop those post-school goals, plan a course of study, identify transition services and activities that help them meet all of those goals. Now, an important part of this collection process or data collection process is to gather information about a student, their family's current and future resources. So for example, if a student wants to enroll in a four-year university, it's helpful to know if a parent, has financial resources to do that, or if they are willing to do, the loan situation. We don't want to get in a situation where we're preparing students to do something and that is not even close to what the parent had in mind. Transportation is a big deal. So making sure that we are gathering information from families about the student's career development. The examples that are on the, let's see, I think I have a, yes. So the last one there, we call it ESTR because it ESTR. So if you've used these a while, you know them by the color of the paper that they used to come in. One was a salmon color. Now they're all available online. But ESTR J is for students with mild disabilities. ESTR 3 is for students with more moderate disabilities. And then ESTR S is for students with the most significant disabilities. Here is an example of ESTER 3, and this is gauging students' employment. This is what it looks like. Here's ESTER S. You see that this is for the caregiver to give that information. It's really quick information. It's easy for us to get from the caregiver or the parent. Another informal is direct observation. Okay, so direct observation of student performance should be conducted in the school. It should be conducted in employment. It should be conducted at education training or some type of setting. We used to call this situational assessment, but direct observations are done by, a job coach, co-worker, a vocational educator, maybe even a VR counselor. But in keeping with, that self-determined philosophy, sometimes students record their own data. Direct observation data typically uses task analysis. So you have a task analysis to do a specific skill, and then we gather data on the student's transition or ability to do that skill. Okay, this is an example of a really easy task analysis for maintaining the work area. So you retrieve the assignment, the materials are on the work surface, you complete the assignment, you return the finished product, you return the materials, you clean, and then you retrieve the next assignment or request a break. So then you're able to see, can the student do these specific tasks? Now, when we're first developing a task analysis, we want to break it down into every single discrete skill, meaning that it can't be broken down any farther than that specific skill. And based on the student, you may quickly progress through those. So the one that I made here is a picture-based task analysis. And this is for if you work at a movie theater and you need to check the restroom. This is a picture-based task analysis so that the student has a picture of each of the components. And then you scaffold that help away, and then it becomes a checklist. And then the checklist goes away. So for example, if someone goes in to observe the work site and the student quickly and accurately completes all these tasks, interacts well with the coworkers, and appears happy, the data may suggest that that student is successful and enjoys this type of work. But little did you know, or little did that observer know, that it all started with, this picture-based task analysis. So remember how I said setting up a job tryout or a specific situation is a lot of work? Well, based on the student's needs, it can be a lot of work. And this is just the continuation of that. Oh, because the very first task tells this person to see the sign that says open, flip the sign over so that no one comes in the restroom while you are cleaning or checking the restroom, because you may be a female cleaning the male bathroom, or a male could be in there, et cetera, et cetera. There could be all kinds of rules. So you want to make sure that we maintain everyone's confidentiality and we don't make anyone uncomfortable. And then whenever it's time for our guests to come back in the bathroom, we flip it back to open. So start to finish, we wanted to make sure when we did this picture-based system, the student understood every component. So another informal would be environmental or situational analysis. So if you haven't visited the Job Accommodation Network website, this is amazing. The Job Site Analysis Survey is amazing. These used to be referred to as ecological assessments because it helps us examine environments where activities normally occur. Like, for example, if we had a student who says that they are interested in karate class that's offered at your local YMCA, that environmental analysis could be conducted to look at transportation needs and expectations for a participant. Like, do you have to be a member? Can you use the locker room there? Can you take a shower there? Or what if a student expressed an interest in watching after pets at a local vet office? An environmental job analysis could establish that job requirements to match that specific student's interest area. So what we're saying is a critical part of the job analysis involves the identification of reasonable accommodations. That's why I mentioned the job accommodation network, because a lot of times job restructuring, modifying equipment, or acquiring those adapted devices, reorganizing some type of workspace, or utilizing the job coach, all of that requires things for us to have to do to make this successful. So we want to make sure that we get an accurate picture of all of that by collecting this type of data. And this is really an excellent source of information on job accommodations and modifications is the job accommodation network, because we haven't had every accommodation or modification known to man in our classroom, whereas the accommodation network really sets up a lot of great examples. The environmental analysis involved to create these has a structured format for collecting those. And so most employers do have an evaluation form for their job site so that you can help fill that out. And that also can help come up with some of the things that the student may need. So now what we're going to do, if you are watching this replay, we're going to pause again so that you can read the case study on Jonathan. Okay, so we're back, and the environmental assessment. Remember, it's like evaluating an environment and then matching the student's skill and inventory to that environment and the job task required. Often a student may have interest or express interest in a specific career. And then looking at other assessment information, it may be determined that that student wouldn't be able to complete that. But if an apparent match is found, the student should have an opportunity to at least participate in one of these situational assessments. So you read the case study on Jonathan. Jonathan's an 18-year-old man. He has mild intellectual disability. He wanted to become a doctor or a physician. But because of some of his limitations, maybe this isn't possible. But he does like the medical environment. So some of the suggestions could be the nearby hospital or delivers meals to patients, pick up trays when they're done. It seems to be a match because it will allow Jonathan to have contact with the patients and medical staff and require skills that Jonathan has already. So then we could create a volunteer opportunity for him to see if he is successful, it matches what they need, and this could be something that the job is offered to him for pay. So that was a great example of environmental analysis. You may have come up with other, places for him to be able to get some of those situational assessments, but anything that you are using to figure out why the student wants to be in that specific field is a great example. So students who are involved in activities at home and school in the community, these provide ready assessment opportunities. At these times, parents, the school staff, we can help the student determine specific skills that they need, and we can assess during the activity. The environment can be school, home, grocery store, mall. A variety of skills and behaviors are related to work that can be evaluated in all those situations. Think about taking a small group of students to the mall or to a local store once a week. So we're learning how to handle money. We're learning how to interact with people in the public setting, in a job setting. We're improving our abilities to ask for information. We can assess students' ability to communicate with others. We can assess students in following direction, finding items, asking for assistance. We can, really find out some information about students' confidence. I remember I had a specific student that didn't talk very much to me in class, kind of did the things that I asked of him. And then in the community, I really saw his personality, and I really saw things that he was passionate about because he was interacting, in familiar places. Whereas I was a new teacher and I was new to his school and he didn't open up to me at all. And so, by seeing some of those things, we were able to connect him to a law enforcement position just in the observational data that I was able to get while we were in the community with him. So observations in the classroom and student reports of their abilities can also help us advocate for the accommodations that the students not only need in their employment, but also in general education classes, because that can help us provide the assessment information we need to help them when it's related to work later. And the ability to advocate and explain the needs that the student needs, and they're able to practice that with their teachers, is so important, because they're going to also have to advocate for those same things to an employer when they move on into the workforce, and that helps them be successful in that specific area. Okay, so if we're going to pause again, these two case studies are a little bit longer to read those. So if you want to pause here, and you could pick Tyleek or Clarissa and their disability categories are very similar in these. If you'll pause the video here. Remember that it's a useful strategy for gaining meaningful information about a student's strengths, limitation, and interests is to perform the assessment in the actual environment, really doing work task. So one way to accomplish this type of assessment is to evaluate a work environment based on requirements of the job. So for example, in the case study, if you read Clarissa, so job requirements of a job could include the hours that, will include the hours the student works, dress and grooming, communication with the public, physical ability, skills of that nature. And then we need to evaluate the student's ability to meet those requirements by observing them for a period of time in a work situation. So sometimes this can be accomplished by a job tryout or an unpaid work experience with an employer. And then if the student's able to do those things, then we might have the opportunity to fill out the application and move forward. So Clarissa wanted to work at Taco Bell. She's proud to wear a uniform, enjoys being around other people, and it even said she liked children in her assessment data. But she has difficulty following routine steps and may not have the physical skills to do the job. She's had several jobs in school and is able to complete tasks when the routine is consistent and the same over and over, and her time is structured. So we could set up an unpaid tryout to determine if she continues her interest or ability to do the job. And then if she was successful, one of your things could have been on the case study is she could be hired part-time or job coach, just depending on the things you picked from the case study. And Tyleek, he had an interest in working at an office as maybe an administrative assistant. He has really good communication skills. He doesn't type very fast, and he's not a very good speller, but he wants to try a job in an office setting to see if he likes that kind of work. So we could make arrangements. Some of the examples could be spend a day at a busy office with a receptionist, have the opportunity to maybe do filing, make copies, put reports together, answer the phone. And then, he could learn if he's good at filing by number or alphabetizing or taking messages, or, what specific parts of those jobs that he would be successful in. And then we could match that based on file clerks are needed, documentation production centers, different type things to match the current skills that the student has. And then that experience will give us as the teacher valuable information about the kinds of things that we need to work on in the school year, which is the whole purpose of transition assessment. So another informal assessment is curriculum-based assessments. Curriculum-based assessments are typically designed to gather information about a specific curriculum. So you see on the screen the Life-Centered Career Education Curriculum, Brigant, and Choice Maker. Those are all great curriculum, and all of the data that are gathered in those CBAs gather information specific to those curricula. School performance measures that are informal You've got some great examples on the screen, but these are, informal things that the students could either participate in group, there could be observations of student classroom behaviors. I didn't put that one on the screen, but the end of course test, grade assessments, and the statewide tests are things that our students are going to be a part of regardless. And then the observation of the student classroom behavior would be a good school performance measure. For example, like participating in group work, on task behavior, assignment completion. All of those things provide useful information regarding our students' strengths, needs, and interests in the area of academics, but they're relevant to the future education and training environments for the students. And I put student portfolios on here because, that is often used to help us look at testing accommodations and even some attendance data. Transition planning inventories. So those involve a process which identifies strengths and needs for a given student as they prepare that transition from school to community, school to employment, or independent living. These inventories usually have a lot of aspects of adult living, employment, post-secondary schooling, training, independent living, interpersonal skills, adult service needs, and community living. All of these are really great examples. I have support intensity scale. This really helps individualize some of the supports that a student may need in the community once they do the transition. It's really good to do this while the student is working in the community, visiting the community. Another example would be the independent living skills assessment, and this is an example of what it looks like. And then, like I said earlier, there are a lot of informal assessments that our teacher made. And so while I'm not suggesting that you go out and you make transition assessments, because if you are a new teacher, or new to transition, or new to high school and assessing all of these skills, we have so many resources for you that you do not need to spend your time making them, is what I was trying to say. However, there's some really great tools that teachers have made that gather the information that is needed. And so one of the things is the job tryout. A lot of teachers create their own job tryouts. So what you have on your screen is components that should be included in a tryout assessment. Tryouts are assessments based on specific occupations and occur in an actual environment of the job. So students are going to complete a series of hands-on tasks that are required to do a particular job. Teachers, we have to do all of this. We have to set this up. We have to develop the task analysis. So remember earlier when I said that this could be very time consuming? This is very time consuming because this is the best way to assess the student's interest in a particular job and to see if the student has those skills necessary to complete the job. But you also have the opportunity to witness their abilities and attitude about the work while they are performing various tasks and they're in the actual work environment. So an example of a tryout of a chef, since that's my post-secondary outcome based on that transition assessment. For me, it could occur in a restaurant or a community college that has a culinary arts program. So I would learn basic techniques of using a knife for dicing. That would be a beginning. And then if I'm able to cut things like carrots, celery, and onions, I could use that for stock of like a soup. And then maybe learn to make muffins by following a recipe. And then during the course of making the muffins, I may have to use the balance scale to measure the flour. I may have, restaurant size and style equipment, sanitation and safety rules are going to have to be followed. Someone's going to have to teach me those skills. And then from all these activities, you'll be able to look at my fine motor skills, my reading skills, my measuring skills. Can I follow directions? All of those things are going to be able to be assessed by my supervisor or my teacher, and even through self-evaluation, I'll be able to tell you if I'm able to complete those things, if I like doing those things. And then also another thing that my supervisor or teacher would be able to assess is how quickly I can learn new skills, how I become independent in completing tasks, and then continued interest in that specific field. Obviously, that entire example was, being a chef, but that could be done for any specific job. And the components here should be included in any tryout assessment that you develop. So for example, analysis of knowledge, academic skills, and thinking skills that are needed include opportunities for the student to perform some of the academic tasks required in the job, like forms that need to be filled out. The student could complete a simple form. If math calculations are needed, the student should have to perform calculations on paper using a calculator or in their heads in order to complete the task. I mean, there's a pretty big convenience store chain in South Carolina that it's a gas station and kind of like a little restaurant. And for students to get employment at that job, there's a math test and that students have to take, and they're not allowed to use a calculator. And one of the reasons they do that is because they want their cashiers to understand that, what the change would be giving it back, and that not to always rely on the technology or the cash register in general. Hands-on activities that are actually done in a particular job or program, students, will be evaluated on their speed in learning the new information and frustration tolerance when faced with something new. Can they perform the task? And most importantly, are they still interested in it? The task analysis of the hands-on task that will be performed, breaking it down into step by step. That's so very important. If you do not know how to develop task analysis or just need help doing that, please contact us. We will be more than happy to help you and probably have something similar already developed for specific job tasks, especially school-based enterprise, guys. That is a great way. If there's a school-based enterprise at your school, or one of the teachers or you even are implementing those type things, that's a great way to look at job skills or get those situational job tryouts and even collect data on students if they're able to complete those tasks. Self-evaluation, students should have the opportunity to evaluate their own work. No matter what job you have in your life, if you are given an evaluation, you always have an opportunity to respond to that evaluation. And so teaching students how to accept criticism, how to accept compliments, and they should be able to evaluate their own abilities to do the job, interest, and their interest in the job in that specific environment, because those are skills that they will need in adulthood, no matter what employment area that they go into. And then it could be, the teacher supervisor evaluation. It could be a pre-made form. I think I put an example. Yeah, this is the one that's on our website. For work-based learning experience, we ask in the top part, the job description, basically what is the student required to do. And then we wanted target training objectives for the student, because if we're going to evaluate the student on specific components of work, then we want to make sure that they know what the training objectives are and their participation and performance on those specific objectives. And then employability attributes, another word for that is soft skills. And I gave an example of those over here, like attendance, appearance, initiative, motivation, self-direction. All of those things that you see on the right side are skills that we need for all jobs. So of course the student is going to be evaluated on those soft skills, but they also will be evaluated on those specific training objectives. So job tryout documentation, this specific one is available on our website. but you can create your own, or honestly, every job that you do a tryout in probably has some type of evaluation already in their workplace. And so we can adapt that for the use of our students. Now, we have looked at a tremendous amount of formal transition assessments and informal transition assessments. So what we're going to do now is we are going to look at several case studies. We're going to look at, you're going to pick case study 1 or case study 2 based on the population that you serve. And then we're all going to do case study 3. So what our first task is going to be is you will pause the video here. And if you work with students with mild disabilities, you will pick students with learning disabilities to do case study 1. Or if you work with students with developmental and intellectual disabilities, or more low incidence disabilities, you will pick case study 2. So pause the video here. Okay, so what our intention here is, when you have read through the case study, seeing how to use both formal and informal assessments for your transition planning. So if you look through case study 1, that student participated in formal career vocational assessments in the 11th grade that indicated that she would be interested in, doing something that had hand-eye coordination, using tools to perform the job. And then you look at her academic grades, and she received mostly C's in her core content areas, but then she had B's in art and music. She had never taken any mechanical courses. And I think she was in algebra for about 3 weeks when it became too hard. So her attendance is good, and her behavior is generally appropriate. And then, given the information that you had so far, you could decide what she should try out and pick a specific area that she go into and assess her work. So that could be accomplished by trying a variety of activities that reflect the skills that is needed for those specific areas, and the activities that occur in a technical program. And sometimes students do get paid for working in those environments, and their interests and skills are assessed while they're working. And sometimes employers actually even, will hire the students. But I hope that through that case study, you saw how formal and informal assessments are used together to impact planning, and how it showed the ongoing process of, that was just her junior year. All of those assessments and all of that data were just 11th grade. And so how we use that, assess, plan, instruct, and evaluate model to help that particular student. So if you looked at the student with developmental disability, that student participated in more of a self-contained classroom, and really didn't have any idea what they wanted to do as a career. 10th grade, 16 years old, had some medical difficulties, and decided that maybe working full-time wasn't a goal. So the parent kind of questioned if they would be able to participate in competitive employment at all. So you looked at the formal skills assessment and, tried to figure out, interest level. And then you could pick some of the options. One of the interest inventories that required no reading and no work tryouts, that offered a lot of different career opportunities, job options in different environments. And at that point, the options to volunteer probably would be the most appropriate for that student. And then the informal assessment interest and ability can be determined, and a volunteer or paid job can be pursued for the information gathered. And if you are watching this on playback, I'm certain that you have got lots of great ideas on things that student could do, or case study 1. So these 2 case studies were really to get you to think about how formal and informal assessments go together. I know that while we were talking through formal and informal, it seemed like they were separate. However, using them together, combining formal and informal assessments really ensure appropriate career and vocational planning. And so if we will pause now for a second so that you can read through that last case study. It's really important that we combine formal and informal assessments for planning for students. Teachers and parents can develop a wide variety of performance tasks that simulate real-world job tasks that students can perform to assess knowledge, skills, aptitudes, as well as, their career interests. And some of the things that teachers can use and parents can use, within the school, technology monitor, cafeteria worker, snack bar, coach assistant, community volunteer, office assistant, copy assistant. Many of these opportunities can even be developed for younger students, or when it's hard to figure out how to make arrangements for students away from the school building. And so you're still able to use both types of assessments to gain the information that we need to inform those IEPs. So the last case study, the student was real specific in saying that, an interest was in auto mechanics. The informal interest inventory supports interests, and then looking at further information needed that applies to the skill. A formal skills assessment or work sample can be given. The results say that the student does have the motor and reasoning skill to perform the task, but further evaluation or data should be done to assess the academic ability of auto mechanics for safety purposes, and then to be sure that the student is truly interested in the field based on actual knowledge of the task performed. He or she should participate in the tryout. So I hope that you were able to see how the data changed the course of the plan for that particular student once more information was gained. Okay, so we've talked through so many examples of transition assessments, transition data, and really talking through the things that are important while we are doing transition planning as far as transition assessment goes. So what do we do with all this? We have all this rich data from education, employment, training, independent living, all the areas that are so very important when we are making that transition component. So transition assessment drives the IEP development. I want you to think about that. Transition assessment drives the IEP development. You cannot begin to write the IEP until you do transition assessment. I know many times people think that the information is just for the transition plan, but information from transition assessments that include those formal and informal assessments truly are used to develop the goals and objectives, identify other agencies, anything that will support the student. The accommodations needed in both education and employment can be determined with transition assessment. Focusing on assessing career, interest, skills, those are essential for the student to transition seamlessly into whatever post-school goal that they may have. All of this information that we get drives the IEP. Nothing that you can do within the IEP component can be done until you do the transition assessment, because your IEP goals have to align your post-secondary goals, and you can't develop post-secondary goals until you've done transition assessment. One part that we want to make sure that we mention is that parents are a really important part of the assessment. I know I gave some examples of how they can be included in the assessment and planning process. They really have an important role to play before, during, and after evaluation. So, providing parents with information on, what we're doing. We have an example on our website that is just like a little letter to parents that says, that we're doing questionnaires with the students and we're gaining some transition assessment data, and that to better understand their child, their strengths, needs, and areas of difficulty, it would be helpful if they could give us some data. And so, that's important because the parents have the opportunity to, think through and record their thoughts on paper instead of like an interview where they have to come up with the answers so quickly. And there's some research out there that has said that is the better way to get parent input, because many times we use education language when we're doing interviews that may come across the wrong way for parents, and we want to value all of the information that they can give us during this process. So transition assessment must address education, training, employment, and independent living. And I know that we have said that a few times. And, transition assessment really should have multiple sources of data. And we have to view that data through a transition lens. The assessment should reflect the student's needs, strengths, interests, preference, and the post-secondary goals that the students want to achieve, and steps. All of that serves as the foundation for your IEP planning process to get to those goals in education, training, employment, and independent living. And transition assessment data can also be used to help make decisions for instructional strategies and accommodations that the student may need within the context of their instruction. And so, summarizing all of the transition assessment data should be used to help, students develop plans that help them, define and achieve goals in education, training, employment, and independent living. Results from all of the transition assessments should be included in the student's IEP so that the student and family have access to all of that information. It should be easy to read, easy to understand. It's just important that all of this is documented in the IEP because it's included in the assessment portion of the IEP. It can be mentioned in different components within Enrich. Now, going back to the statement that's on your screen, I'm sure that some of you will say that, well, now, Jennifer, IDEA 2004 says that appropriate measurable post-secondary goals based on age-appropriate transition assessment related to training, education, employment, and where appropriate independent living skills. And you're exactly right. The law says that you do not have to have a post-secondary goal in independent living, that you only have to have a post-secondary goal in education, training, and employment. You're exactly right. My presentation is not about post-secondary goals. This presentation today is about transition assessment, and you must do transition assessment in all of these areas, because if you do not have assessment in independent living and you do not develop a goal in independent living, then you have no way to justify that it is appropriate or not appropriate. So making database decisions is not optional. Optional. We have to make database decisions. So if you say this student doesn't need an independent living goal because I administered this independent living assessment and they showed blah, 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 well, then you're fine. Then the student didn't need that. But if you don't have the assessment, then you don't have any data to make that decision. So where do we put this on the actual IEP? So under post-school considerations, you have your transition findings. And this is the information obtained from your transition assessment that you put in the narrative section. And the present level of academic and functional performance is your big picture. And then it's narrowed down in the findings. And the narrative section is where you put the transition assessment data. This is a picture of Enrich. You click the assessment information, and then at the bottom is the add feature where you can put them individually and document the results. Because remember, you cannot solely base the IEP on one transition assessment. And, you know, best practice is that you go across the domain areas. So even if you use a formal assessment that may go across multiple domains, please use at least two. Please use at least two, maybe one formal, maybe, you know, one formal and one informal. But, you know, the more assessments that we use, the more rich information that we will have on our students that inform that IEP. So if you look at the transition chart, we call this the transition flow chart, and we've used this picture for years and years and years. And so today's presentation, we have only focused on that top piece. We've spent our time together really focused on just transition assessments. We've gone through informal examples. We've gone through formal examples of all the transition domains. Now what you are going to do with that data is you are going to put the meaning in meaningful IEPs. The next session today is with Dr. Cindy Nixon and John Jacoby, and they are going to finish the flow chart and show you how to use the age-appropriate transition assessment data that we've gained through all of this work that we've been able to do, and write measurable post-school goals, identify transition services, write the student's course of study, write annual IEP goals, and then coordinate services with adult agencies. Now, if you did not attend the session, the live session, we also recorded that, and it will be on our website. So if you're interested in, you know, using the transition assessment knowledge you've gained today and writing meaningful IEPs, both of these sessions will be available on the Transition Alliance website. Like I said, we have only gone over age-appropriate transition assessments today, and their presentation will help you finish off the IEPs. But you see what comes first: transition assessment. There were a lot of resources that we went over today in this presentation. This particular screen, the very first resource there is the DCDT fact sheet. That is a fact sheet made on age-appropriate transition assessment and gives you lots of information that I went over today. And then the others are basically articles that are the data that were shown in the presentation. And then this page here is our resources. The first one is an article for transition practices for vocational rehabilitation counselors. I know a lot of our transition transition age students are working with vocational counselors, and as teachers, we always want to, you know, come up with strategies and ways that, you know, it's a seamless transition, and we're working on specific practices together. So evidence-based practices in transition for vocational rehabilitation counselor. This is a resource that you can do together. Okay, so the age-appropriate transition assessment Padlet is amazing. This was made by the National Transition Technical Assistance Center. It used to be INSTAC, now it's INTAC. They created this, it's been in 2020, so it's not, you know, it's only been in the last few months. And so they have it broken down by the domain, and I took a lot of screenshots of those and used some of those in today's presentation, but it is organized beautifully on a Padlet for you to just download the specific resources that you need, and the assessments that are available online for students, you're able to just click, download, send to the students. So if some of us are doing remote learning and virtual things with students, or virtual academy, or even some of our charter schools who are online, full-time online, this is a great resource for doing transition assessment online and getting the information to the student. The third resource on the screen is transition terminology. There's a lot of terminology that we use in education that sometimes is confusing to people that we collaborate with, but especially in transition, there's a lot of terminology that we use. Sometimes businesses, sometimes parents, sometimes other agencies we all get confused in the lingo. One of the words that really, in my career caused some issues was job carving. And that was terminology that we used in the transition world to suggest that we were teaching components of a job as we went along, not that we were actually carving the job to fit the student, or that we were carving out pieces of a job that weren't, the student still did 100% of the task. It was just some terminology that we used back in the day that really caused me a lot of problems as a teacher, because businesses really didn't understand. And so this transition terminology is a really great resource to share with parents, businesses, other educators. Coordinated set of activities. That is a resource that will help you when you are writing in your IEP, the transition services and activities, making sure that you have connected all of the things within the flow chart to your transition coordinated set of activities, meaning that they are related to transition activities that are based upon transition assessment. It's a really great resource. And then the transition assessment document is a lot of transition assessments organized onto this document in one place. We have all these resources available on our website. We have a lot of really great transition assessments on our website, very organized, teacher-friendly. But if there's ever any resource specifically that you are looking for, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. That's what we're here for. We want to support you. The Transition Alliance of South Carolina email that is at the top of your screen goes to our whole staff. If you send a question or, a general, you're looking for a specific resource, or I mentioned something, or one of the other presenters mentioned something and you can't seem to find it, please send us an email and we will be more than happy to get that for you. And then my email, I do have a USC email, but the one that is my Gmail is the fastest way to get me, because it does go straight to my phone. If you're like Jennifer, you were talking about a reading free interest inventory for career assessment, I can't find it, just send me an email and I can, send it. It will take me less time to send it to you than it would be for you to try to find that specific resource. Or if there's a resource that you were really hoping that we would go over in transition assessment, or there's a specific instrument that you're really thinking about trying out and you wanted to look at those assessments, reach out and let us know. We did bring live IEP, or we did bring actual IEPs to our live version of these presentations, and so we were able to look at very specific examples. So if you're listening to this recording and you would like some help with your IEPs, we will be glad to help look through how transition assessment could impact your IEP, or how to make that a better part of your IEP, or really just anything that you need help with. We are more than happy to help you with anything transition. And so we hope you have learned a lot in any of the sessions that you've attended in our virtual camp, and hope that you contact us with any questions.
Thanks, Jennifer. And just as a final reminder, for more resources, please be sure to visit the Transition Alliance webpage at transitionalliancesc.org. Thank you and have a great day.